Debugging async code. Async code bugs are the hardest bugs for beginners. So async simply means asynchronous. So asynchronous bugs are the hardest bugs for beginners when you work with async code in JavaScript as a beginner. You can find it difficult to debug because most of the time the code will be correct, but nothing seems to be happening. Then why is async code hard to debug? The reason is because the synchronous code runs later. So it always makes error fields invisible. And in that process, the common problems that beginner runs into includes missing data and then silent failures that are not so obvious to detect or catch at the point of execution. And another thing is that async code does not run from top to bottom, unlike the normal regular JavaScript code that will execute from top to the bottom. So async code always run when something finishes. So like a background uh, job that will have to execute only when something has been completed. So that is what makes it harder for beginners to debug and find what is wrong in that code. Now let's look at a function that can help with debugging asynchronous code. It's called the debugging fetch method. The fetch function is asynchronous and does not return data immediately. So for example, so if you have something like this, so let's say you have something like this. You want to fetch a data from a JSON in a JSON format from maybe a file or whatever. Now, so using async and await or promises, then and join, then you can use this then method to extract response from what your JSON returns. And again, you can chain another one for data. Now, if you look at what I have here, you can see uncaught in promise. So this is a promise in JavaScript, syntax error, JSON.pass. That means the way I'm trying to pass this JSON is wrong. And then it's telling me that there's an unexpected character at line 1, column 1 of the JSON data, which means that the error that I'm looking for is actually here. Now, as a result of this, what is it called, colon or something? Now, you can see it that when I remove the colon, then it removed the syntax error. With the quotation, it will give me a syntax error because when you want to fetch a data from a source in JSON format, you don't enclose it in a quote. So if I remove it, then it will give me the correct error. And that correct error is the fact that this data I'm trying to access through promises in JavaScript is not defined yet. So in a situation like this, before you use data, always log the response before you use the data so that you can actually find out what exactly is wrong in your code. Another thing is that you can check the network tab. So some other time you can check the network tab, look at it. So the network tab are often network problems. So you can check the network tab to show if a request failed. For example, when you see a status code of 200, this indicates that this request was successful. When you see 404, know that this means that these resources cannot be found. When you see 101, when you see 404, so each of these status code represents a a description of what actually happens when a request is being made in your JavaScript code. And so the network tab can be a good place to trace what is actually wrong in your async code, because most of its errors are always network related. So the network tab then show you a request status like this. This is an example of a request status 200, which indicates that this is successful. Then to show you the file path, so you can see I'm index.html, and if you see it, so it's showing me the file path. And then if the server return an error, so I can check what is it that my data return. If I click on this now, you can see I can check the response. You can see because this request is successful, it's returning my page. I can check requests. I'm not making any payload. And headers, you can see the status 200. Okay. You can see the URL, and I'm making a get request for this particular file. So this is how you can use the network tab to track to check for exceptions in your async code. So moving on, let's talk about how you can debug async and await. We just saw how you can debug promises using the fetch method when you use promises in your JavaScript code. Async and await. Async and await make async order code easier to read, and they are still asynchronous. So if you have something like this, an async function, so you wait. Let me just use this as a sample placeholder, and then you can log in the data. Now, of course, you can see this is not showing any error right now, but then you in situations where you run into an error, for example, let me change this and put something like data.json, like the example I used earlier. Now, even this as well is not showing an error, but it's saying, so let me refresh this. Okay, so in my console, there's nothing. And also in my network tab, everything seems to be fine. No, now this is an example of an asynchronous code in JavaScript. Now, when you have code like this and you run into an error, maybe you have a bug in it, how do you troubleshoot it? You can set breakpoints on a wait line and use debugger to trace where a problem could be coming from. And you can also step through async code the same way as normal code by, reading it to figure out where there is problem. Also note that async errors must be handled explicitly, otherwise they fail silently. If you don't handle these errors explicitly, they will fail silently, and then they can affect the output or the intended result that you expect in your code. So this is how you can handle asynchronous error in asynchronous code. Now, the debugging checklist for asynchronous code, you check the console for errors, you check the network tab, you log responses before using them. Use try and catch with async function and set breakpoints on a wait line. So with this, you can be able to pinpoint where something is actually wrong in your async code at any point in time.